This is the editing room of a scholar, a professor of philosophy. His name is Huston Smith. For 6 months, Dr. Smith has been doing research on a special project and recording his findings on film. His purpose has been more than usually serious and profound. He's made an attempt to discover America's own moral answers to 16 of the most basic public and private issues that Americans face. In his search, Dr. Smith has traveled thousands of miles and asked literally hundreds of questions. He's talked with scholars and statesmen, newspaper editors and economists, philosophers and politicians. Tonight, from these priceless film records of that journey, Dr. Smith has drawn together what he believes are America's best answers to another basic problem of our future. Tonight on The Search for America.
I'm Huston Smith. The object of our search tonight is the American home. The question, what kind of family do we have, and is it the kind we ought to have? Though it's the most intimate and personal institution in our society, the American family has become a public issue, pawed over by sociologists, preached over by clergymen, clucked over by marriage counselors. There is perhaps no other subject that provokes as immediate an interest. Every daily newspaper in our country will have at least one writer who does nothing but write about family problems. When I began my search into this institution, I knew, of course, that the American family was the bedrock of our society. As that institution which transmits to each oncoming generation two things. First, the primary values that will guide it throughout its career, and second, the primary inner resources it will have for pursuing these values. The fate of every nation ultimately is decided in its homes. I knew, too, that the American family was changing. What I didn't know was how it's changing, nor did I know that my search into this institution was going to provide me with more surprises than I found on any other issue in this series. The search itself began, appropriately enough, at the American Museum of Natural History in New York City. I was on my way to see Margaret Mead, confident that this world-famous anthropologist who had devoted her life to studying the family not only in America but throughout the world could give me as clear an understanding of this institution as anyone alive. How right I was, I think you'll soon appreciate. Dr. Mead, is the American family in danger? Is it in crisis?
This is something we've been saying now for, over 30 years. It's partly a way, of course, of talking about the family and thinking about it, because in the United States we won't think about anything until we have a crisis, and the thing we're thinking about is in imminent danger.
Well, is this then simply a problem that we're artificially construing for ourselves? What about the number of broken homes and the rate of divorce? Are these not causes for alarm?
You realize when you talk about divorces and broken homes and all of these things, these happen to an earlier form of marriage, and now we're talking about a new marriage. It is so new and so young, we don't know yet. We don't know how strong it's going to be. We don't know how viable it's going to be. We don't know what the children are going to be like. We also have more people married more of the time in this country than we've ever had. We have the largest proportion of married couples, and we have the greatest emphasis on the home as a value and as an ideal for every young person in the country. The post-Korean family, post-Korean War family, is one of the strongest and most family-centered family. That may sound rather nonsensical, but you know there have been families that have been there to serve agriculture or to serve industry or to serve politics. Our families at present serve nothing but the family itself.
Is this what you mean by a post-Korean family?
Partly. That with World War II, our parents began being willing to subsidize young marriages, even if people weren't ready to be married yet, just as they did in World War I. But in between World War I and World War II, and immediately after World War II, they went back to the older American notion that young people had to become economically independent before they could marry. Then with the Korean War, and again uncertainty as to young people's future, we really went over, finally, I think, for quite a long period at least, to parents being willing to subsidize and help their children's marriages. This is one part of the family-centeredness. It's parents being centered on their children's marriage and their children's children as a very important value.
Are there any other positive values which have come into the family picture since Korea, or is this the central?
Well, there's also, of course, a much greater interest on having children. Some people may think this is a little excessive. Young people used to think that they wanted to be married perhaps for 3 or 4 years, they hoped, before the first baby came. Now they want the first baby at once and the second baby almost at once. If they're not very rich, they think maybe they'll have to put up with only having 4 children, but if they're prosperous, maybe they can have 6.
Who wants these babies, both the mother and the father?
I think the young fathers want them even more than the young mothers, on the whole. The young fathers have had a chance since World War II to see a great deal of their babies due to housing conditions and absence of servants and absence of sitters, and they've become enamored, I don't think there's really any other word one can use, with little babies. And of course they want another little baby every year. And the young mothers put up with this. I think you have to sometimes say put up with it, because the rewards are so great of having their husbands interested, rushing home from the office, sharing in the care of the children, and they have a great deal of companionship from their husbands that they didn't used to have.
Do you think that this matter of more children and also more marriages comes entirely from a positive pull on the part of the individuals involved, or is there a social pressure towards both of these things?
No, there is a social pressure. That is, if a girl who isn't married today at 24 is likely to be regarded as an old maid. It was 25 in 1900. In between, it got much later. You could get away with not being married and not being an old maid up to 1930. In 1930, up to 30. Now, you're definitely worried. Girls begin to worry at 18 or 19 if they're not engaged. And boys also today want to settle down. The all-male colleges are having difficulties. The all-female colleges are having difficulties because college is a time when you should certainly get married settled.
Well, do you think that these pressures towards marriage are sound, or do they trespass to some extent on the individual's freedom?
There's some very positive things about this, of course. It's a marriage in which young people are more likely to marry into their own group. They're more likely to marry someone their parents approve of, which means, on the whole, someone they are more likely to get on with in terms of background. They have this long-going study period, gives them a chance to get used to each other. These are positive things, and also these shared interests in the home are positive. Now, the negative ones are partly this great emphasis on boy-girl pairing off in early teens, which means that we're giving up friendship, one-sex friendship, and especially friendship between boys. And as far as we know, no great civilization has ever flourished that didn't have highly developed student friendships as young people, when they grew up and differentiated themselves from their families and had time to think out who they were with other boys of the same sort and the same interests. And you see, if with this present courtship pattern, means young people begin going steady in their early teens, and by the time boys are at the age when they go to graduate school, go into medicine or law, or might take a trip around the world, they're likely to be married with 2 or 3 children. And this limits the development of individuality, it limits adventure, and it limits professional commitment. And instead we have people who are primarily committed to the home, primarily committed to staying in one place because Jimmy's in the 3rd grade and it would be bad to move him in the middle of the year, limited to one environment and to a small suburb, which they may identify with and work quite hard on, but cut off essentially from the rest of the world. So it's a good marriage, but it has some very definite limitations.
Does it limit the men in the vocations they choose? Are they inclined to pick ones which don't have such long training periods?
They're inclined to either pick one that doesn't have a long training period or insist in some way on being supported and having a family through it, which may mean their wives work to support them, and we're not quite sure that works very well either.
And that we really don't know how the post-Korean family is going to come out on these counts.
We don't even know that this may not be a kind of preparation in society for an exceedingly exacting age, when perhaps it's safer for people to face it entirely by twos. As, for example, you know, if we were to have space colonization as opposed to space exploration, we'd have to send exceedingly firmly married couples out for such colonization.
Well, this is a fascinating point. When you say that this may be a preparation for a very exacting world, I wonder if there's a danger of this family becoming turned in upon itself and lose that factor of preparation for the world and just become an end in itself.
Well, I think at present it is. I think there's a great deal of anxiety, a great deal of sense in young people that the world may blow up, there may be a devastating war, that they have no control over what may happen, and their hope is to push it off for 10 or 15 years, and in that 10 or 15 years to live completely, to be independent, married, have children, have a career, and round out their lives. So we have this whole tendency to buy everything on time, so that your oldest child will have as good a bassinet as your youngest.
Yeah. So there may be a danger of the family eclipsing responsibility for the larger world.
It looks that way.
Let me ask you personally, Dr. Mead, do you think that people are too much married today in our culture?
Well, too much married would be another way of saying what we've been talking about, wouldn't it? That this is an all-purpose marriage. It's supposed, your spouse is supposed to give you every form of satisfaction. You're supposed to be able to work with them, play with them. They're to be a helpmeet, the parent of your children. They'll be able to fix the plumbing or drive the car. You ought to want to spend every living, breathing moment you can steal from the office with them. Now, this is pretty hard on any marriage. It's asking a good deal.
That's an exact answer to the question of whether people are too much married. What if I were to ask whether too many people are married? Do you have any feeling on this?
Well, I think it's a pity that we're leaving no room for celibacy. We're leaving no room for, no honorable room for people who would like to live with their parents and who find their parents more interesting than anybody else they've met. Because today we send such people to psychiatrists and say they're bound with silver cords, instead of recognizing that many daughters and many sons have probably had a much more interesting life with their parents than they ever have had with the husbands they've been forced to take. We don't leave enough room for people who really want to commit themselves to a career and who may not want to think about marriage and children till perhaps they're 35 or 40. We rush them into marriage so young.
Dr. Mead, do you think that there's a battle of the sexes in America today? And if so, who's winning it?
Well, I think the battle of the sexes has been a joke for a long time, and Thurber draws it very nicely, and it gets continually underlined by Madison Avenue. See, Madison Avenue, after all, is primarily concerned with advertising. Advertisers talk to women. Advertisers are the people that are really enslaved by women in this country because women buy things. So after they've spent weeks and weeks and weeks writing ads to make women buy things, they think women dominate men. And they then write about the battle of the sexes.
Well, do you think this is only a joke, only a fiction?
I think it's a continually revived notion that's fed by a whole series of things. It's fed by Europeans coming in and finding that women's position in this country is different than it was in Europe. It's fed by new immigrants who are surprised when they have to push the baby carriage in this country, and they didn't have to do it at home. Or when we don't think it's a good thing to let women milk the cows, or something of the sort. So each new immigrant wave from a country where women have a different position, feed it. And then there's series of odd things that happen. Coeducation feeds it, of course, because girls are about 2 years ahead of boys, physically. And all the way through school, the girls do better than the boys, and the girls mature earlier, and the poor boys are pushed around, made to compete with girls when they're younger, forced into dating long before they want to date. And so our form of coeducation gives the boys a sense that the girls are taking the lead.
Do you think that men and women are becoming more alike in this country?
On the whole, yes. If you look at, now women are taking over the automobile, beginning to drive the automobile more and more, and we think of the airplane more as a male symbol. But still, the airplane belongs to men still. And at the other end of the scale, as the boys have abandoned the horses almost entirely for the cars, the girls have taken over the horses.
You say that on the whole they're becoming more alike. Do you think that this is a danger from the anthropological point of view?
Well, there are great rewards in contrast between the sexes. It makes marriage simpler if every woman is absolutely convinced what it's her job to do because she's a woman, and every man is convinced he must go out and hunt a lion because he's a man. This makes life somewhat simpler between the sexes, but it makes life much harder for many members of each sex, because in every society that we know about, there are a lot of men who don't want to hunt lions, and there are a lot of women who aren't good cooks, and who might want to do other things. And if you highly stereotype the sexes, I'm just speaking of occupation, but this applies to expected character. If you want all men to be rough, it's hard on the gentlemen. If you want all women to be gentle, it's hard on the rough women. If you want all men to be taciturn and patient and all women chattery and gay, again, you're penalizing many people in each group.
Values lost and gained in either case, so it's impossible really to make a value judgment about whether this convergence is a good thing.
Well, we could make this kind of a judgment, and that is that for the first time in civilized history, as far as we know, and you know we don't know too much about the home life of ancient Egypt, but as far as we know, this is the first time in civilized history where babies have been brought up by men to any extent. Now, we don't know what the results are going to be. It may make an entirely new kind of human being, a child that is cared for as much as an infant by a father as a mother. Because in the past, both sexes have been cared for by women, which meant the males had to work to differentiate themselves from their mothers, and the girls could just relax and identify. And this had all sorts of implications in personality. This may change. Each sex now will be brought up by both sexes, and we may make a much more rounded kind of person.
Dr. Mead, do you think that it's possible to have a society in which the family is not the basic unit?
We've never found one yet. There are societies that have tried it. The Soviet Union tried it and has gone back to one of the most rigid family forms that we've known for many years. Nazi Germany tried it, and Nazi Germany didn't survive. Communist China tried it for a brief period in their early history. But even those societies that have had a doctrine that was definitely against the family have found they had to go back to the family, because we know no other way of turning a child into a full human being.
The next day, across the city and some 50 blocks downtown, I had an appointment with a man whose profession includes dealing with the American family. His name was Dr. Bertram Beck, and he is Associate Executive Director of the National Association of Social Workers, a dull-sounding title that gave me very little clue to the brilliant and intense man I was about to meet. Dr. Beck, is the family today in crisis? Is it actually disintegrating, or is it, as some would say, in a period of transition?
I would say that it is in a period of transition, a period of change.
In what ways specifically is the family changing today?
Well, I would say, for one thing, the family is becoming a more democratic institution. That is, there is more of an opportunity for the voice of all members of the family to be heard. That's one important change. Another way in which it is changing is that there is more leisure time available to all members of the family. More opportunities, I don't say that they are together, but more opportunities to be together. I think there is more of an interest in family life.
What strikes you as the most common mistake that parents today make in the raising of their children?
One of them, I think, and a very important one, is lack of consistency. That is where something is wrong one day and right the next, where children are loved to death one day and then kind of given the cold shoulder the next. I think a second important error that we make is, and this is probably an error we make in all human relations, it's working out too much on young people. That is, instead of nurturing them and helping them to develop to their fullest potential, trying to prove through them something maybe we didn't quite make out in ourselves. You know, the parent that pushes a child in one direction, that uses a child as an instrument to show off how smart the parent is or how gifted the parent is. This is a bad mistake.
Dr. Beck, do you think that there is a battle of the sexes in America today? And if so, who's winning it?
Yes, I think there is something of a battle of the sexes. And I don't know whether anybody's winning it. We may all be losing it. Actually, the tendency has been, I think, again, because of technological changes, that woman's place has changed. That's plain, and there is no getting away from it. Because woman's place has changed, man's place has also changed. Men and women compete today in a field. This means, I think, a watering down of functions. That is, the identity of the man as man and woman as woman is no longer as clear as it was socially speaking, and this is creating problems.
I take it that you don't think that woman's place should be more in the home than she now thinks it.
No, I don't think that her place is in the home, because her place as a human being is where she can fulfill the potential that's within her to contribute to other human beings in our search for a better world. Now, this isn't necessarily in the home. Some women, sure it is. But there are other women who have a great deal to give in addition to being housewives and mothers. And there are some women who won't get married and have a great deal to give in their single status.
Well, do you know of any other highly industrialized culture in which the relation between the sexes is better?
I think that all highly industrialized cultures are going through the same problems that we are. Now, in Soviet Russia, we've read a great deal about women's role and would appear to be more emancipated, and I think that they probably have discovered certain social forms that we may come to eventually. I was interested to read, for example, of the overwhelming number of women physicians in Russia. Now, you know, we have a great shortage of physicians in this country, and I don't think we've ever seen, with the exception of a few specialties, the role of a physician as being a woman's role, and yet healing is very close to a woman's talents and capacities.
Looking back over the last 50 years, Dr. Beck, do you think that the feminist movement has been a success? Do you think that the gains have been worth what it has cost?
I really couldn't say. It would be almost impossible and presumptuous, I think, to try to weigh, for example, in the balance, unhappy women dissatisfied with their role, men who have been deprived of their full masculinity because of competitive women, to weigh against that contributions that women have made or feelings of freedom that women have gained. I just don't know how to balance that. I would approach it this way, that to me, it's in the nature of man, because of his biology, because of his central nervous system, that he constantly experiments with social forms, seeking a way of life that eventually, maybe not in our civilization, but in some civilization, eventually it brings him the most in peace and security and fulfillment. Now, it is part of that seeking that women threw off the yoke that they had to carry before the feminist movement. Now, all progress, I think, is accompanied by pain. Look at what's happening in the South today. I mean, much unhappiness, but I believe that out of it will come a great gain, a useful gain. In the same way, because I believe in people and in their eventual destiny, I say not necessarily in our civilization, but because of their nature, that eventually they will find the social forms that are most productive of fulfillment. I believe that what started in the feminist movement will someday, when we know how to handle these problems, eventuate in a society where human beings are not confined by a role to which they are born, but rather can live into a role given whatever potential they have at the time they're born.
More than any other inquiry in this series, this one into the American home left me encouraged. Not that we don't have some problems. Both Dr. Mead and Dr. Beck have mentioned several. There's the pressure on people forcing them into marriage. There's the pressure for them to marry young, so young that the normal experiences connected with the freedom of the single state are foreshortened. There's our tendency to be inconsistent in our treatment of our children, and also our tendency to try to live our lives through them. But these, it seems to me, are minor things compared with our greater interest in the family, our seemingly greater love of children, and our tendency to find more of our life satisfactions within the home. If now we can only keep the family from becoming ingrown, if we can keep our concern for togetherness from eclipsing our concern for community, world, and nation, then perhaps we may be on our way to building a better family than America has ever known.
This is National Educational Television.